February 8th, 2004, the Sierra Nevada mountains. Snowboarder Eric Lamarck crawls into daylight, his feet numb and frozen.
I'm having to hold my feet and warm them up so I can take the frozen socks off, just to get a look at them.
He peels off his socks to uncover his worst nightmare.
And I knew right then and there that I'd lose my feet. They were purple, they were black, they were swollen.
The fear and isolation hit him all at once. He lost his way in the Sierras 36 hours ago, and his chances of escape are quickly fading.
I started to scream once, twice, and 3 times for help as loud as I could. And all that I heard was an echoing chill in my voice coming right back at me. I fell back and just said, "You're just not as tough as you think you are," because that was it. I was ready to give up.
It's February 6th, 2004. Eric Lamarck, a 34-year-old Olympic-trained hockey player, is hitting the slopes at Mammoth Mountain. Die-hard snowboarders like him flock to the ski resort, 310 miles north of Los Angeles, because of its frequent and heavy winter snowfall.
The snow condition is so light and so pure that we call it champagne powder. It's so just weightless and fluffy that there's no resistance whatsoever on your board.
Today's weather promises more of the same. By 3:30, Eric sees a storm front gathering on the horizon.
It was engulfing and eating everything in its path. And I was like, wow, that's weird. So I said, all right, well, I guess it's gonna be an early day.
He decides to make one last run before calling it quits. He rides up to the 11,000-foot-high summit and hikes out to the easternmost ridge, a remote and largely untouched area called Dragon's Back. Only hardcore enthusiasts venture there, since it has no ski lifts or clearly marked trails.
Dragon's Back is for experienced ski and snowboarders. It's not groomed, so once you take off on the back, you're basically on your own.
Eric stares out over the edge and finds just what he's looking for: fresh champagne powder, a giant valley of it all to himself, with no one else in sight.
It's the first time I've ever done this run, too, but I've always wanted to do it.
He figures that he'll enjoy a quick run and head home.
I'll be back in the condo in 15 minutes, soaking in a hot tub and cracking a beer, and here I go.
Eric takes a breath, launches into the air, and plunges downhill.
I was coming down Dragon's Back at a nice rate, in no hurry, just beautifully linking my turns. I was really enjoying the run, had that ecstasy feeling.
Meanwhile, the winds are gaining speed, and dark clouds are advancing rapidly. The conditions are so ominous that the ski patrol is clearing people off the slopes. Yet no one realizes that a lone thrill seeker, Eric Lamarck, is already headed down Dragon's Back. By 4 o'clock, the mushrooming cloud mass spills into the valley and swallows up Mammoth. As Eric continues to descend from 11,000 feet to 10,000 feet to 9,000 feet, he sails into a blinding sea of fog.
I hit the fog. I hit this storm that came back in, and I went from visibility to down to 10 or 15 feet. It's like I stepped through one door and from one world into another world.
His euphoria gives way to confusion, and he drastically cuts his speed. He loses all of his momentum once he rides into a plateau and finally grinds to a halt.
Immediately the board just sank down in the snow.
Eric realizes then that he's stuck. He's about 2,500 feet from the top. His only way out is to hike west toward the main slopes until he finds a groomed trail. He unstraps his board and heads in what he believes is the correct direction, wading through hip-deep snow.
Having to take 20 or 30 steps in the snow, at that altitude, You're hyperventilating a little bit.
He spends the next 45 minutes pushing forward 1 foot at a time, straining for breath, only to arrive right back where he started.
This is a situation that I'm too experienced to be in. I felt embarrassed. I felt silly. Okay, now get yourself up and get out of here.
Many times experienced hunters, campers, snowboarders, etc., skiers, get into a serious situation because they've done it so often, they've had no trouble, they may have had some close calls, they got home, nothing's going to happen to me.
It's now 5 p.m. Eric is out of daylight. The sun has gone down and the temperature is in the 30s. He devises a risky new plan. He'll climb partway up the ridge where he came from and snowboard downhill again. It's the only way he can get enough momentum to ride past this plateau and on to the next slope.
I can see where I'd carved down my path, and I was going to try to stay inside of those turns. Let's just ride out of here as fast as you can. Ride down, stay as tight as you can inside of your tracks.
Eric treads uphill 800 feet and pounds out a platform to launch off from.
This was probably the most dangerous thing I've ever done in my life.
Then he kicks off on his white-knuckled ride.
Just tried to stay within inside of the tracks, and there was trees that were brushing up against me, and I just went as quickly as I could. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, am I going to make it out? Am I going to make it out?
As he darts in and out of the trees, his heart racing and his adrenaline pumping, Eric feels every one of his senses come alive like never before.
All of a sudden, it's like there was an acute heightening of my senses, of vision, of smell, and hearing, to the effect where I was actually able to zoom in on things and was able to look at something and then re-look at it and almost focus it closer.
Eric sails 200 feet beyond his original tracks, but then gets stuck again. He's no closer to escaping the flat-wooded area. His plan has failed.
I said, okay, you're not getting out of here tonight. It's time now. It was snowing pretty heavy at this time, and I wasn't about to go track around anymore. I was freezing cold now and wet. I smacked my pocket, and there were those matches that I had put in there in a plastic baggie, and that gave me a sense of comfort.
By this time, the ski patrol has closed all of the slopes. No one's looking for Eric, and no one even knows he's out here. He'd been staying alone at Mammoth, and it's not unusual for him to go several days without calling family or friends.
It was all up to me, and nobody was coming to help me, and there was no magic wand that was going to be spun.
The temperature is right around freezing. A bone-chilling wind slices into him while he gathers kindling to build a fire. Eric tosses tree bark and branches into a crude pit, as well as thread from his hat and shirt. Then he goes to strike a match and makes an awful discovery.
The seam of the bag had worn through, and the matches were completely soaked. The entire strike pad side just disintegrated, and it just made my heart sink. And now I can't make fire, and I'm stuck, and I'm freezing.
Taking stock of the other items on him, a dead cell phone, an MP3 player, and 4 pieces of bubble gum, he finds that he's woefully equipped.
This fella is in serious trouble, okay? He doesn't have any resources to rely on except what he knows about in the environment. He has nothing with him. Everything is against him.
He now faces 2 choices: buckle down and wait for the ski patrol to find him, or set out to reach safety.
If you do get lost, a good cardinal rule is to stay in place. You definitely don't want to keep going to an area that you're not familiar with.
It was very frustrating as a high-level, experienced guy to be in this situation. Being stuck was not an option to me.
Eric presumes to know where he is and believes that he can find a ski lodge called the Tamarack in another mile or 2.
I felt like I had to make a decision, whether it was a right decision or a wrong decision.
So he mounts his snowboard and proceeds to head in the wrong direction.
I'm on the steepest terrain I've ever been in my life. I'm so vertical that my elbow, as I'm making turns, is hitting the snow that I'm riding down. I started to hear my equipment scrape on rocks, and that told me, oh my God, you're going off of Hangman's Bluff, which is a mountain climber, sheer face.
Eric immediately veers away and stops. By the pale moonlight, he suddenly recognizes how far off course he's gone.
There was burned out tree stumps and stakes sticking out of the snow, and I realized, oh my God, this rode me to the back of the mountain. They had a fire in 2003, and now I'm looking down in this white snow and seeing these black stakes sticking out.
He has the sinking feeling that he's made a horrible mistake and that he's hopelessly lost.
I just thought to myself, this is not a place for a human. You're walking through the shadow of the valley of death right now.
February 6th, 2004. Former Olympic athlete Eric Lamarck is lost in the Northern California wilderness at Mammoth Mountain. The 34-year-old snowboarder took a series of wrong turns after riding into a storm. It's late at night and the temperature is below freezing. As he searches in the dark for a place to make camp, he sees a pair of hairy, dog-like animals emerging from the woods.
I just stopped in my tracks, and I slowly pulled my board with the bindings in front of me like this, and I glimpsed down, and there is one sniffing at my pocket this close to me. And I just immediately went, ah! And I grabbed my board and I just let out the giant, most fiercest roar, and I just kind of like exploded with this passion of how could you be in this situation? I'm frantic now, and now the blood is pumping. All I'm thinking is that they smell something on me.
He grabs the bubblegum from his pockets and hurls the pieces as far as he can. Then he breaks into a mad dash.
Immediately came the panic and the running and looking behind. I'm just wanting to get something where I could fend my back, where I could burrow down and I could just shield myself and fend off an attack that was what I thought was inevitable.
Eric dives for a downed tree for protection and takes a defensive position.
I just nestled my back and I sat there with the board in front of me, just patiently, and just hyperventilating. And here I was, now just a piece of meat.
As he waits, he can't help but think of another skier who'd gotten lost at Mammoth. His name, Chris Foley. Authorities had recovered Foley's remains just 5 days earlier. All that was left of him were his ski poles and his feet. Apparently, a hungry animal had found him first.
Instinctively, I was readying myself for a fight, shouting, getting my blood pumped up. Like, I remember just smacking my elbows against the board, putting it in front of me, and just going, okay, when's it coming, when's it coming, when's it coming?
But the animals never appear again. It seems that he scared them off. Eric spends the rest of the night sharpening a branch into a dagger with the edge of his snowboard.
When you feel this vulnerable and it's like something is looking at you, and I had a sixth sense that something was kind of creeping, looking at me, I needed to be ready for the fight.
February 7th. At sunrise, Eric gets moving again after a sleepless night. The cloud cover is so low that he can't make out the top of the mountain, but he's confident he can find his way to the nearest ski lodge.
I'm thinking, I put myself in this situation, that's no big deal, I'm gonna get out of here.
Eric forges ahead, unwittingly in the wrong direction and deeper into the Ansel Adams wilderness. Before long, he hears the steady murmur of rushing water. A deep, bottomless thirst rises up in him as he steps into a clearing and sees the San Joaquin River.
When I saw that water, I saw it as a form of energy and a form of, life. And so immediately I kind of put my board to the side of me and I shimmied out on my stomach, put my hand on a rock, and I drank. Just face down, face in the water, and just drank as much as I could nonstop.
Suddenly, the fragile surface beneath him breaks.
I plunge face first, and I come up, and it's freezing. Beyond. And it's pulling me, and I'm getting smacked in the shins with rocks.
Eric clings to his board as the current sweeps him downstream. He finally stabs his board into the river bottom for leverage and paddles furiously toward the bank. It's a narrow escape. The current leads straight toward Rainbow Falls, an 80-foot drop.
I'm soaking wet now. I'm laying in the snow. And I'm to a point where I'm hyperventilating.
But he's not out of trouble yet. He's landed at a remote spot along the riverbank. The only way out is to climb a steep 25-foot embankment. As he scales the incline, he punches into its deep snow, one fist at a time. He struggles to pull himself up.
I'm thinking, this snow is so unstable, I'm just going to cause an avalanche and throw myself back down.
He eventually reaches the top, utterly exhausted and shivering.
My whole body was boom, 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 boom. And so was my brain now. I don't know if it was just the shock of the cold, but now I started to question myself and just kind of gaze around and look in confusion. And I'm just like realizing you're in trouble. And my next thought is, you better get these clothes off.
Eric makes camp several hundred yards away at a cliff face that offers protection from the wind. He wrings out his clothes and hangs them to dry, leaving only his boots on. As the temperature hovers near freezing, he does everything he can to generate body heat.
I just had to just keep moving and dancing and shouting and singing and almost, I call it like a fire dance. And I'm just jumping up and down trying to stimulate, rub my body.
After his clothes dry, he chops down tree branches and shaves off bark and pine needles for bedding. The debris will help to insulate his body from the frozen earth. He nestles inside a small crevice in the cliff and fights off hunger by eating pine seeds and bark.
I had an ecology class in college and learned quite a bit about deer and know that they fed off of cedar leaves. It's a very identifiable branch, and it was just too bitter and it was too harsh to my stomach. I was able to eat the pine seeds, but they just kept making me more and more thirsty.
The wind blows in from the north. Eric braces himself for another punishing night outdoors.
You'd hear it like, and then it would hit you.
He spends most of the night shivering as the wind chill dips below zero.
I found the best way was just to stay tense as I could and as close to my body as possible to keep my heat in.
February 8th. Eric emerges from his shelter at dawn, feeling an odd numbness in his feet. He pries off his boots and discovers that his socks have frozen to his skin.
I'm having to hold my feet and warm them up so I could take the frozen socks off, just to get a look at them.
As he peels each of his socks free, the fabric tears the skin off his soles. He's horrified by what he sees.
They were purple, they were black, they were swollen, and I knew right then and there that I'd lose my feet.
The fear and isolation hit him all at once. He believes then that he may never leave this wilderness alive.
I started to scream once, twice, and 3 times for help as loud as I could. And all that I heard was an echoing chill in my voice coming right back at me. And on that 3rd time, I fell back and just said, "You're just not as tough as you think you are," because that was it. I was ready to give up.
February 8th, 2004. Snowboarder Eric Lamarck has been lost in California's high Sierras for more than 36 hours. He's battling hunger, hypothermia, and exhaustion. The sub-zero temperatures and treacherous terrain are taking their toll on him. Now, he must deal with frostbite in both his feet.
I'm thinking that these feet are gone, and how do I now get myself out of here? And all I thought of was humiliation.
Losing his feet terrifies him, yet the fear of failure scares him even more. He thinks of the shame and grief that he'll cause his parents if he gives up.
I wasn't going to let them down. I wasn't going to let them find me or have to hear the news that their son had died. I just took a couple deep breaths, and on this eyelid and on this eyelid, it was like somebody stamped white light. It said, "Help yourself." And it instantly motivated me.
Psychologists have a word for this, which is self-talk. And that is a conversation that people seem to have with themselves internally at moments of crisis. Often the other voice, the one encouraging you to go on, will come from deep within your history.
I probably said that, "Help yourself," about 500 times until I put my socks on and I started my trek. Help yourself.
Eric gets moving again, his feet too numb to feel any pain. He still can't see the top of Mammoth Mountain because the cloud ceiling remains too low, so he trusts his instincts to lead him in the right direction. Yet they don't. He continues heading further south and further from help, until the clouds finally part for the first time in 3 days.
It's almost like God magically came and scooped the sky out. And now I turned around and I look, and I can see the back of Mammoth.
It's a shocking sight that takes his breath away. He's almost 6 miles from the point where he first started.
I was kind of astonished that I would be as far as I was. I was so convinced that I was traveling down the right valley that, again, thinking and knowing and feeling that it's right, close is not good enough in this situation.
He knows there must be a shorter route back to civilization, but he's not sure where that is.
Then the next emotion was obviously, okay, now which way is out? Now that you know where you're here is what's the fastest way for me to get out of here?
In a flash of inspiration, he digs out his MP3 player, which is equipped with a radio. He picks up a signal coming from a local FM station in Mammoth Lakes. The signal grows strongest when he points the radio north. He decides to hike in that direction. One gigantic obstacle, however, stands in his way, a 3,000-foot climb up a mountain called Pumice Butte.
I couldn't see it all, the top of it, because of how steep it was, but as I made my way up, at first it starts off where it's just sheer snow. It's sheer just white face, then it gets to a tree-lined area, and then these identifying rock formations come out of it.
Eric estimates it will take 2 days to climb the mountain. After he reaches the top, he intends to head all the way down the other side and hike to civilization. It's a bold, all-or-nothing gamble, especially since he has no food or water and his feet are damaged.
I'm not a gambling man, but I'd say I give him a 30% chance of survival under those circumstances. All the odds are against him. He doesn't have fire, he doesn't have shelter, he doesn't have water, he doesn't have good equipment.
Eric is one of those exceptional people who, on the one hand, achieves because of his drive, and on the other hand, suffers because of his risk-taking.
The climb up Pumice Butte is a struggle from the start, and Eric's weakened condition makes it even tougher. He uses his snowboard as a giant pickaxe to stab into the waist-deep snow and to pull himself uphill.
There was times where I'd stab it, and I'd go to lift myself up, and it would slide back on me and push me down the hill again. This fresh snow was so light and so unstable. It was pretty frustrating and also quite humbling.
Yet he presses forward one step at a time, his feet too numb to feel pain. He manages to scale 300 feet by nightfall. A powerful wind returns to the Sierras that night with a vengeance, kicking up sheets of snow and swirling drifts. Eric burrows into a foxhole, but he cannot escape the painful, bone-chilling cold that's plunged to 0 degrees.
I just basically sat there the whole night, shivering, freezing, pulled myself into my clothing. It was nonstop.
He's lost all feeling in his frostbitten feet and wonders how much farther they will take him. He imagines the vast wilderness that he once loved, now his prison.
I fought so hard to go out and search for this ultimate freedom, and now it had found me and it had engulfed me and sucked me in.
February 9th. The morning greets Eric with a deathly silence. He opens his eyes to find no sun, no sky, just snow and ice. It takes him a moment to make sense of his surroundings. He's buried alive.
I looked at my body and I was under the snow. And it just spooked me like I was in a coffin.
He feels a sharp jolt of terror and rams his fist through the icy casing. Then he kicks out the rest and digs his way into the open.
Now, I'm freaked, I'm tripped. Here I am, I dig my own pit on the side of the hill and let myself get buried alive in it.
The adrenaline rush sends him on a fresh charge up the mountain. Climbing with urgency, he fixates on one goal, reaching the summit.
I just kept saying it, repeating it to myself, help yourself, help yourself, help yourself. These feet were gone, but they still had to take me out, and I had to get out before anything else was gone.
Eric scales 2,000 feet to reach the tree line that evening. This time, he builds a fortified cave instead of a trench for shelter. He begins by packing down the snow until it's as dense as possible. Then he carves out a tunnel that's 4 feet deep, using his snowboard as a chisel and a scoop. The cave will not only protect him from the wind, it will preserve heat.
I remember fortunately from an ecology class, we used to take temperatures of the snow, learning that snow is actually an insulator, that the top is colder than the bottom. The deeper you go, the warmer the snow gets.
As he crawls into his shelter, exhausted and spent, he worries about his parents. He knows that they were expecting to see him back in LA today.
I just prayed and I said, Father, please just let them know that I'm all right. Because I'm in a situation, yes, but I'm going to get myself out of here. I'm not going to die here.
February 10th. Eric is within 1,000 feet of reaching the summit. After a full night's sleep, he plans on conquering the mountain.
I felt refreshed until I got out and I started going up. And it wasn't about 25, 30 steps that the dehydration took its effect on me. The altitude sick started making me sick.
He begins shivering uncontrollably and he's racked with hunger pains. It's been almost 3 days since he's had any food or water.
I'd expanded so much energy. Now my body was eating itself from the inside out.
The hypothermia, dehydration, hunger, and sheer physical exhaustion, everything hits him at once. He feels his body shutting down despite his intense will to survive.
We lose our abilities very quickly as your body really fights to stay alive. So there will be periods of intense pain as your body works to move the blood around your system. And you can only do that for a limited period of time before your coordination starts to degrade dramatically, your ability to think starts to degrade, and your ability to move at all becomes very constrained.
As Eric stares up at the summit, he suddenly questions whether he has enough strength left to make it.
Because of all the ailments that my body was facing, the dehydration and the frostbite and the hypothermia, the Grim Reaper was coming.
He fails him. He's had almost no water for 3 days and no food for 4 days. He's also fighting hypothermia and frostbite, and he's hitting his physical limits.
And I'd go to reach up and make my way up the mountain. I would put all this energy into doing it, and the snow would just give way, and I'd slide back down where I started from. And I was like...
He's 1,000 feet from reaching the top. From there, he plans on sliding down the other side to find some trace of civilization. But the path leading to the summit only grows steeper and more rugged. Eric must undertake the toughest part of his climb in his weakest condition.
I started falling asleep, and then I said, you gotta make your way up this hill. You're not allowed to rest until you take 10 steps. Help yourself. I was pulling my legs in and out of the snow, jamming up there. 10 steps, I'd stop, I'd fall asleep for 5 minutes, an hour. 10 more steps.
Back in LA, Eric's friends and family have grown alarmed. They'd been expecting him home by now.
His friends and I were constantly calling his cell phone, and it just kept going into voicemail. All sorts of things go through your mind. I really felt something was wrong.
Eric's father, Philip, calls the police in Mammoth Lakes to plead for their help.
Philip asked us to check his condo, see if we can't locate Eric. From that point, I found out where he was staying at, one of the condos in town. Contacted the owner, got permission to go inside. And once inside, I found personal clothing, toiletries, and I didn't find any skis or snowboards. So at that time, I assumed that Eric and his friends were on the mountain.
Police file a missing persons report and notify the local ski patrol. As night falls in the Sierras, Eric builds another snow shelter, but he can't sleep. His dehydration and hunger are worse than ever. Eating snow won't do him any good, so he resorts to the only option left.
I remember taking off my gloves and putting them and realizing that I was about to do this, and kind of humiliated, and I already stank as it was. And so I peed in my hands, held it, spilling it on myself, choked it down, did it again, choked it down, took some ice, sucked on it. I figured that recycled fluid is any fluid. That was gonna at least put as much water as I could back into my body and try to get my blood flushing through again.
He's steadily losing his grip on reality.
I started to have the vision from, I was being visited by the Grim Reaper. I thought I saw, a man dressed in black, and I was like, who's there? Who is it? What do you want? It's freaking me out. And I just attribute that to death was just knocking at my doorstep right there.
February 11th. With 300 feet left to go to the mountaintop, Eric summons the very last ounces of his strength. He crawls all the way up on his hands and knees and finally collapses 20 feet from the summit. He's been trying to get here for 3 days.
I'm scared now, because what happens if I look over and I don't see what I thought I was going to see? My mind's playing tricks.
He digs a shelter and curls up inside. No longer able to move, he falls into a deep sleep. Search and rescue teams have been looking for him all afternoon. They're scouring a 30-square-mile area. It's a daunting task to cover the entirety of Mammoth Mountain, and so far rescuers cannot find a single trace of the missing snowboarder.
There's a bit of detective work when you're trying to track these skiers and snowboarders. You'll get on a track that you might be curious about and want to know where it goes, and you can follow it for a while. And 9 times out of 10, it'll curve back towards the mountain.
Most of the time on cases like this, they might not find any bodies, and they'll start the rescue again in the summertime, and then they'll find possibly remains or clothing.
From his spot on Pumice Butte, Eric does not see or hear the ski patrollers, dog teams, and helicopters 6 miles away. He slipped into his own vacuum of time and space, his depleted body on shutdown.
I spent the entire 7th day sleeping. I was completely exhausted and spent. I was dying at a fast rate.
More than 30 people are out searching for him, and they're not having any luck. They must stop for the night and wait until daybreak to continue.
That was supposed to be the night that was kind of the crucial threshold. At that point, they thought there was a real minimal chance that he'd be found alive.
I didn't allow myself to think it. I just didn't allow myself to think it. I just would go out in the backyard and I would just scream, God, where is he, please? Jesus, please help.
Nobody has ever survived 7 days in the wilderness outside Mammoth without food or shelter.
They were giving him a 15% chance, 10% chance of survival. You keep the hope, you want to be positive, but realism comes in.
On the 8th day of his ordeal, Eric awakes knowing that his time to escape is almost up.
I realized, you know what, you're dying. Today is do or die.
February 13th, 2004. Eric Lamarck is barely clinging to life after being lost for a week in California's high Sierras. He's had almost no water for 6 days, besides a few handfuls of melted snow. He emerges from his shelter dehydrated and gaunt. As he sprawls out in the snow, he fades in and out of consciousness.
I kept envisioning that it was like a video game and I could hit the reset button, and it finally scared me after I had the same dream 3 times in a row that I realized you're dying. You're basically dying of dehydration, and it's an easy way to die. Your body's just going to fall asleep. Your blood is thickened so much, and I vowed to myself, that I'm going to get out of here.
He staggers to his feet, only to discover that they're frozen solid like bricks. He's lost all flexibility in his toes and heels.
My feet were now not only numb and frozen, but they were dead. I was stumbling in the snow and falling over.
A profound sense of isolation suddenly hits him. He reaches for his MP3 player and turns on the radio, desperate to hear another human voice for comfort.
When you're away so far where you can't even contact one human soul, it's absolutely terrifying and lonely. I needed to hear some kind of contact with the outside world.
He picks up a signal from a local FM station. The morning news begins, and to his surprise, he hears his own name. He's the headline story.
At first I was like, whoa. I was very excited and then, I got angry and I heard Search and Rescue has called in the National Guard to do a body recovery for Eric Lamarck, and I'm like, body recovery? I'm right here.
The news gets his adrenaline pumping. He decides to pack up his gear and head for a clearing where he'll be more visible to helicopters. He leaves the radio on and switches the dial to white noise, hoping that rescuers might pick up his signal.
I'm thinking that this is on a big scale, that they're going to be using whatever they can to find me. Why not send out some type of signal?
Eric's signal is not strong enough, however, to reach the search parties out in full force around Mammoth Mountain, 6 miles north. State and local authorities are leading a tireless operation there, with more than 30 people looking for Eric for the past 2 days. Still, the wilderness that surrounds Mammoth is exceptionally vast, and it could take months for anyone to find him. One ski patroller follows a wild hunch, taking a detour into a remote area known as Mammoth Pass. There, he and his partner come up on a single snowboard track.
It was the only track that we had seen in quite a while because it was so far off the back. Then we came upon which looked like a crude camp. It looked like somebody tried to stay the night and build some shelter. When we saw that, we had a pretty good inclination that that could possibly be Eric's track.
The ski patrollers pursue the track several miles south along the San Joaquin River Valley and past Rainbow Falls. Eventually, the terrain becomes too rugged even for them.
There's very few cases of people getting lost off the backcountry. More often than not, they'll stop and follow their tracks back out. Very few people keep going the way Eric did.
The ski patrollers call in their GPS coordinates. A National Guard helicopter team will have to pick up the search from here. Back on Pumice Butte, Eric struggles with the simplest of tasks as he prepares to head to a clearing.
I started putting on my gloves, my goggles, my boots, everything like it was that most important game, that most important do-or-die situation. I concentrated on getting all my stuff perfect.
He grows confused when the lacing on one of his boots breaks. He can hardly think straight enough to fix it. He fusses with the boot for several minutes and almost doesn't hear the chopper in the distance.
I went to get up and I went to grab my board and I hear
National Guard helicopter crew has spotted Eric's tracks from the air and is following them up to the summit. The pilot maneuvers the bird at hover speed about 200 feet above the trees.
We're flying pretty low to the treetop and looking not only forward and down to the side, but also at an angle down under the trees.
We reached the top of the ridge, and all of a sudden the pilot in command and the medic said, "There he is."
He was huddled up against a tree. I think everybody was surprised that initially he appeared like he was alive.
The chopper actually just flew by, and now I was in a complete panic, like, oh my God, they missed me. I scramble out, and the helicopter turned, and it perched, and it was about a quarter mile away, and I went like this, and all of a sudden it was just right on top of me. It was just, I dropped down on my knees, and I put my hands up in victory.
A medic hoists Eric up to the chopper, and off they go. The crew chief snaps this photograph of Eric moments later.
He had that look of disbelief, thinking that, you know, I can't believe you guys are here. But he was definitely glad to be where he was at. I think that he was just trying to come to grips with whether it was actually all real or if he was dreaming.
I realized really what I was faced with was so much death that it's a miracle that I'm here.
But Eric's ordeal isn't over yet. When he arrives at Mammoth Hospital, he's dangerously hypothermic. His body temperature is only 86 degrees, more than 10 degrees below normal. He's lost 40 pounds in 8 days, and his feet are black with frostbite.
The first thing he said to me was, "I'm sorry." And then the second thing he said was, "Mom, don't look at my feet." I said, "Of course I can look at your feet." You know, I took care of those feet for many years.
Gangrene is set in, and a rotting infection will spread to the rest of his body if doctors don't amputate both of his feet. The Olympic athlete faces his worst nightmare of all. His physicians remove his feet and then another 6 inches off each of his legs. Eric refuses to give up his competitive spirit, however. He vows to return to the slopes to snowboard again.
Now this pin goes into the prosthesis here, and it's got a release right here. So I'm going to put that puppy back on before we get up and get some riding done. Make sure I'm all the way in there.
Today, Eric is indeed back on the slopes, with the help of prosthetic limbs fitted below his knees. And he's not afraid to revisit Mammoth Mountain either. He has a wife now and 2 kids, and he brings them with him.
I can enjoy the mountain for what it's worth, where I don't have to go and conquer all and be the first one up and last one off anymore. Is that now I can go and watch my son coming down the hill and my wife coming down the hill and get more enjoyment than I ever got from riding any powder, run that I've ever done.
He's making the most out of his life, out of his family, and he has a smile on his face. And not a lot of people have that in his situation, or just in general anyway, so I'm impressed by that.
As painful as the ordeal in the wilderness was, Eric insists that it changed his life